My name is Naomi. I'm 35, and last Christmas my mother stood up from her own dinner table, pointed at the door, and told me and my 9-year-old daughter to get out and never come back, right over the good silverware. She said the house was happier without the two of us in it. My sister nodded along like she was passing the butter dish. My whole family watched me gather my daughter's scarf off a chair, and I didn't scream and I didn't cry. I said 11 quiet words, and I opened my handbag. 5 minutes later, my mother and father were running barefoot down the driveway through the snow, banging on my car window, begging me to take back what I'd just done. But here's what none of them understood yet, standing there in the cold. What I destroyed on that porch was the smallest thing they were about to lose that night. Welcome to Quiet Table, where the person nobody bothered to listen to finally gets the microphone. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, and stay subscribed, because there's a lot more table left to clear. Let me take you back, before the porch, before the tearing, to when I still believed money could buy me a family. At 4:30 on Christmas afternoon, I drove towards Cedar Hollow, 45 minutes of frozen fields between me and my parents' house. My daughter, Ren, sat in back with a shoebox on her knees like it held something breakable, because to her it did. Inside were gifts she'd made herself, a garland of paper birds she'd folded for a month, and a painted frame for her grandmother, her fingerprints still pressed into the paint. In my purse were 2 sealed red envelopes, checked 4 separate times before we left, the way you check for a passport at the gate. My parents' house looked exactly the way it always looked in December, like a photograph staged for a magazine no one reads. Plastic flowers in the window boxes, because real ones die, and dying looks bad to the neighbors. The good china came out for 1 day a year, the china nobody was ever actually allowed to enjoy. I've spent 11 years as a hospice nurse. It teaches you what people cling to at the end. It's never the china. My mother, Diane, hugged Ren at the door and gave me the same nod she'd given me for 6 years. The nod you give a delivery driver, not your own child. Our seats were where they always were, folding chairs at the far end of the table, half in the draft from the kitchen. My sister, Paige, arrived 45 minutes late with her husband, Marcus, and nobody mentioned it. I'd arrived 3 minutes early, and my mother had checked her watch like I'd tracked mud across her floor. I smoothed Ren's hair and told myself this year would be different. I had a small speech memorized for after dessert, 12 years of hoping, folded into 2 red envelopes. I never got the chance to give it. It fell apart over the ham, and it started with my daughter being proud of me. Ren had been holding a story from school all day, bouncing with it, and between bites she finally let it spill. We had to write about our hero in class, she announced. I picked Mom, because she works 2 jobs so we can help Grandma with her house. The room went still in a way I felt on my skin. Fork stopped. Marcus looked up from his wine. My mother's face didn't redden with embarrassment, it went white, which on Diane Whitfield was far worse. Ren had absorbed more from my phone calls than I ever meant her to hear, and she just said the unspeakable thing out loud, in front of the china, and a son-in-law who wasn't supposed to know. That the daughter this family kept hidden in the corner was the one holding it up. That's enough, my mother said too fast. Paige gave a thin, nervous laugh. What an imagination. Ren's face fell, and she looked at me to check whether she'd done something wrong. That look is the one detail I still can't forgive. Then my mother rose, straightened her blouse, and aimed her voice at me like a fire hose. Get out, and don't ever come back. Paige leaned back, relaxed. Honestly, it's happier around here without you too. My father, Walter, stared at his plate like it needed supervising. I stood, I helped Ren into her coat, one arm at a time. I reached into my purse, pulled out the 2 envelopes, and walked to the open front door. Then I turned so the whole table could see me. Then you won't mind me doing this, I said. Snow was falling through the porch light behind me. I opened the first envelope. But that porch moment was 6 years in the making, so come back with me a little further. I was 29 when my marriage ended. My husband left for a coworker when Ren was 2, and he left the way men like that always leave, quietly, completely, taking the car and the last word with him. In Cedar Hollow, the story that spread wasn't about what he'd done. It was that Naomi couldn't hold on to a husband. My mother met me in the kitchen that week, a toddler on my hip and Dvork. E-papers in my bag. She didn't ask if I was okay. She dried her hands on a towel and said, "What will people think?" That was the entire conversation. That was the eulogy for my marriage. After that, things shrank in ways you'd need a magnifying glass to prove. The family photo that year got taken while I happened to be in the bathroom. At potlucks, my mother introduced us as our daughter Paige, and that's Naomi. No title, no explanation. I was a fact she'd learned to live around, like a water stain on an otherwise good ceiling. Nobody ever screamed at me. Screaming would have been visible, and visibility was the one sin my mother feared. I was simply moved, seat by seat, year by year, toward the kitchen door. But there was one kind of phone call that always came through for me, where my name arrived first and my title arrived right behind it. Those calls started 3 months after my divorce was finalized, and every single one was about money. The first was my father's back. He'd slipped a disc, and the bill ran $1,900 more than they had. I was a new nurse with a toddler and a studio apartment, and I paid it in 2 days. I felt useful. Remember that word. Then it was property taxes one hard spring. Half a roof after a hailstorm. Small, quiet advances for my sister's boutique. Always rooted through my mother, always cash or checks made out to my father, always with the same instruction, delivered like a kindness. Don't mention this to anyone, sweetheart. You know how your sister gets. Over 6 years, it added to roughly $20,000, broken into pieces small enough that none of them ever looked like what they actually were. Here's the arithmetic nobody ever did out loud. The money was welcome in that same daylight-avoiding way that shame is welcome, and I was welcome the exact same way. I'd known the shape of the pattern since I was 23, the year I reached for the empty chair beside my mother. She put her hand flat on its back without turning her head. "A seat at this table is earned," she said. It took me 12 more years to understand the actual currency, and that for people like me, the exchange rate only ever climbs. Now I know what you're thinking because I thought it too, usually around 2 in the morning. Why keep going back? I saw the whole pattern clearly. Reading decline is literally my job. I moved us an hour away on purpose, kept visits to once a month, told my sister no, out loud twice, when she tried to borrow from me directly. I did the things a careful woman does. And then I ran into 2 walls, no spreadsheet fixes. The first stood 3 feet 10 and was missing a front tooth. Ren kept a paper chain of folded birds taped to our fridge, 1 bird for every day until we saw Grandma again. My parents were the only other family she really had, and a 9-year-old doesn't understand boundaries. She understands whether the porch light is on. The second was my father's heart. 2 years back, doctors put in a stent, and ever since I can hear his rhythm in his breathing on the phone, the way you'd catch a knock in an engine. He never asks for anything for himself. Instead, he mails me small boxes of screws, sorted carefully by size, because a machinist who was never once allowed an opinion in his own house still finds a way to say, "I see you, kid." So yes, I kept going back. Then the first week of December my father called, and for once it wasn't about money. That scared me more than any bill ever had. His voice carried a wobble I'd only heard in hospital hallways. He talked in circles, then too casually mentioned the bank being difficult. When I asked which bank, he laughed it off. Then my mother's car crunched into the driveway on his end and he said, "Gotta go, sweetheart," and the call ended. I sat at my kitchen table and did what I do at work, charted the symptoms. The property taxes I'd covered. The strange question he'd asked in October about interest rates, hypothetically for a friend. My mother quietly canceling her book circle. Diagnosis. My parents were behind on their home, and nobody planned to tell me until it was terminal. I had $38,000 saved, 6 years of weekend shifts, a down payment fund for a small house with a yard, because Ren wants a dog and I want a door nobody can put us out of again. That night, I moved $31,000 into checking. I wrote 2 checks with Ren's paper birds taped to the wall above me, $22,000 for my parents' mortgage, $9,000 for my sister's shop, because if I rescued her too, my mother couldn't call it favoritism. I was buying the entire family out of the fire. No exceptions, no scoreboard. I sealed them into 2 red envelopes and let myself imagine dessert, my mother reading the number, her face softening, an actual hug where people could see it. Sit with that. I was 35, and my Christmas wish was a witnessed hug. I told my father the Envel. Hopes were coming so he could finally sleep. That turned out to be my one mistake. On Christmas morning, half an hour before dinner, I carried a tray of potatoes back toward the kitchen, and the door stood open an inch. I heard my mother's voice, low and organized, the same voice she uses for seating charts. "She's bringing checks. Let her hand them over after dessert. Things go back to normal after that. Don't make a scene, Paige, just don't encourage her to stay long. And my sister laughed, bright as a knife drawer. So we smile until the pie, got it. I stood in that hallway holding $40 of potatoes, listening to my Christmas get itemized like inventory. Normal. I knew exactly what normal meant in that house. Checks passed in the dark and nods at the door. They already knew the money was coming. My father's relief had traveled from his mouth to my mother's ledger within a day. And the plan, laid out plainly through an inch-wide gap, was to collect the gift and reshelve the giver. I could have walked out right then. The honest reason I didn't was on the other side of that wall in the den, where Wren was showing her grandfather the paper birds one at a time, and he was studying each one like a blueprint, and her whole face was lit up like the holiday had been worth it. One more Christmas for her. I could pay for one more. That was my actual thought, word for word. So I set the potatoes down, smiled, and decided to give them the envelopes anyway. I had no idea my daughter was about to hand them something they wanted far less. The truth, spoken out loud, in front of company. So now you're back at the table with me, and this time you can see everything I couldn't afford to see the first time through. Watch my mother's eyes drop twice to my purse, quick as a cashier checking a register. Watch my sister, who hadn't asked me one question about my life in 6 years, lean in over the sweet potatoes. So how's work? Still pulling those weekend shifts? Which I heard as interest, and which was actually an audit. The conversation stayed all surface. My sister's boutique was pivoting. The church women were planning a spring bazaar. Underneath it all, my mother ran the table the way she ran everything, small corrections handed out like coupons. Wren, elbows. A nothing so practiced it had its own shape. I remember, God help me, actually feeling hopeful. I remember thinking the silence felt softer this year. Then the plates were cleared for dessert. My moment was coming. And Wren, who had waited all day to be proud of her mother in public, got there first. I've replayed the next 90 seconds more times than I can count. My mother's face when the words, "Help Grandma with her house," landed in front of Marcus. It wasn't anger, I know anger. Anger flushes the skin. My mother went pale. She was afraid, though it took me a while to understand of what. Here's what I understand now. My mother had one secret she'd guarded her whole life, that the daughter she'd spent 6 years erasing was the one quietly paying the bills. If Marcus heard it, the town's picture of Diane Whitfield would tilt sideways, taking money from the divorced daughter, needing money at all, so she did what she always does when the picture tilts. She removed the piece that didn't fit the frame. Get out and don't ever come back. The words were aimed at me. The performance was for Marcus, and it was flawless. The wronged matriarch, restoring order at her own table. My sister joined the only way she knows how, by finding the winning side early. Honestly, it's happier around here without you too, relaxed. A woman with no idea she was setting fire to her own lifeboat. And my father, I want you to see him. He pushed his chair back 3 inches. His hands came up off the table. For one full breath, I thought the man was going to stand. Then my mother turned her head, just her head, the way a lighthouse turns, and he sat back down and studied his plate, and something in my chest filed that away in a drawer marked "Done Waiting." I took Wren's hand. We were nearly out when my mother followed us into the hallway and delivered her last line quietly, just for me. "A seat at this table is earned." I stopped on the porch. Snow drifted through the light. Wren's mitten sat in my hand, and I heard myself say the quiet sentence. "Then you won't mind me doing this." I took out the first envelope, $22,000 folded inside like a prayer, and tore it in half, then in half again. Then the second one, $9,000 meant to save my sister's shop. I tore that too, opened my fingers, and let the pieces fall into the snow, drifting slow, like the most expensive confetti in the world. I didn't yell. I buckled my daughter into her booster seat like it was any Tuesday, and the first voice behind me wasn't my mother's. It was my father's. He came off that porch with no coat, dropped to his knees, and started gathering torn paper with his bare hands. 67 years old, a stent in his chest, collecting confetti in the dark. Then came my mother, outdoors in front of a neighbor's window without her coat, something I had never once seen in 35 years. She came down the driveway after my car, crying, "Naomi, undo this, write them again, you have to." Behind her, framed in the doorway, my sister stood white as the tablecloth. "Mom, what checks?" because my sister, who had just voted to throw me out into a snowstorm, had never once been told whose name sat at the top of the pipeline she'd been living on. I rolled my window down 5 inches. "Merry Christmas," I said, and drove home. "You have to" is a strange thing to say about a gift. Gifts don't come with have to. Invoices do. It took one more knock on my door before I understood exactly what she meant. I'll get there. But first, if you've ever handed your family your whole heart in an envelope and watched them weigh it, tell me in the comments what you did next. And subscribe so you don't lose your seat at this table. Mine cost me $31,000. Ren made it exactly 12 minutes into the drive before the question came small from the back seat. Did I say something bad about Grandma's house? I watched her in the mirror, still in her Christmas dress, still guarding a shoebox she never got to give away. "You told the truth, baby," I said. "Truth isn't bad, it's just expensive." She nodded like that settled it and fell asleep before we hit the highway. At home, I opened my hand and found 4 pieces of torn check I didn't remember picking up off the porch steps. Reflex, I suppose. 11 years of nursing teaches you to keep what falls. I had an old glass jar on my shelf where I tossed spare buttons, and I dropped the torn pieces in with them and set the jar by the window, and stood there a long minute without one clear thought in my head. The next morning, the day after Christmas, I worked my shift. Hospice doesn't take holidays off, and neither do I. My last patient was a woman named Alma, 72, sharp as a tack, dying on schedule, and she took one look at my face and skipped the pleasantries. "Family," she said. "Family," I agreed. "Ah," she said, settling back like a judge who'd heard the case before. "The expensive kind." I laughed for the first time in 2 days. I had no idea, yet how much that woman would matter to the rest of this story. The calls started Monday. By Wednesday they weren't asking anymore. Monday was Sugar, my sister's voice, light as nothing had happened. "We all said things. Just come by with the envelopes and we'll laugh about it." The apology skipped straight past itself and landed on the money. Tuesday was Vinegar. "You owe this family, Naomi. You'd be nothing without us." By Thursday it was the group chat, aunts I hear from once a year, suddenly fluent in exactly who I was. Selfish. Dramatic. Think of your poor mother's heart. I handled it like a coding patient, protocol, not panic. 1 sentence per message. No blocking. Blocking is a door slammed shut, and I don't slam doors, I just stopped holding them open. On New Year's Eve, I did the math I'd been avoiding. 41 messages that week. The number asking how Ren was doing, 0. That told me everything about what this family thought it had lost. The following Sunday, my father knocked on my door, hat in both hands like a man outside a funeral. He'd driven 45 minutes alone, which had happened exactly never in 6 years. I made him tea. He sat beside the button jar, looked at it a long while, then pulled an envelope from his coat. This one wasn't red. It was from the bank. I've read a lot of hard documents in my line of work. Do not resuscitate forms have kinder fonts. Notice of foreclosure. Mortgage arrears, $22,400. Sheriff's sale set for February 13th, 10 in the morning. The house I grew up in had a countdown clock ticking on it since before Thanksgiving, and I'd been told nothing, right up until the night I told my father 2 checks were coming. He'd been so relieved he'd told my mother that same night. So when I walked in on Christmas Day with my envelopes, my mother already had that $22,000 spent inside her head. And she threw me out anyway. 6 years without a single consequence teaches a person exactly that kind of confidence. "Your mother isn't cruel, Naomi," my father said to his teacup. "She's borrowed. Everything about her is borrowed, and she doesn't know how to stop paying it back." I asked the only question that mattered. "Dad, where did the original mortgage go? You paid that house off years ago." He looked at the jar instead of me. The answer was a shop called Willow and Vine. 3 years earlier, my sister's boutique was dying its first death, rent behind, vendors calling, Marcus completely in the dark. My sister went to my mother, and my mother, who would sooner be buried than let this town watch a Whitfield. Daughter fail publicly, did the unthinkable, quietly. She took a new mortgage on a house already paid off and poured $60,000 into that shop. Nobody told Marcus. Nobody told me. The boutique kept dying anyway, just slower and more expensively, and for 2 years my parents had been servicing that loan out of a machinist's pension and the amounts you'd send whenever things got tight. Every so-called emergency I'd covered for 6 years. The taxes, the roof, the cash envelopes, all of it had been flowing through my parents, and into the register of the sister who raised a glass on Christmas and announced the holiday was happier without me. I had been the silent partner in Willow and Vine. I had never once set foot inside it as a customer. I couldn't have afforded the price tags. I washed my father's teacup and put it away. Then I did the thing careful people always do last, because it makes everything real. I opened a spreadsheet. 2 nights to reconstruct 6 years' bank statements, cash withdrawals matched against holidays, old texts that said, "A little help by Friday, love you." The total came 4,000 higher than I'd carried in my head. 23,000 once you counted the loans never repaid. I printed it out, and here's the part that matters. I didn't email it to the aunts, didn't post it anywhere. I taped it inside my kitchen cabinet, next to the button jar, where only I would see it, because I finally understood I'd never needed proof for them. I needed proof for myself, for 2 in the morning, for the voice insisting maybe you imagined the whole arrangement. Meanwhile, Cedar Hollow had already chosen its story without waiting for evidence. The pastor's wife called, voice like warm hand lotion. "Naomi, your mother is devastated, but a house, isn't that bigger than hurt feelings?" It's remarkable how quickly a small town agrees on a villain. Once the villain has a divorce and a savings account, everyone kept saying the word house. Nobody said the word home. February 13th, sat 6 weeks away. I'm going to tell you about the night I almost caved, because any version of this story that skips it is a lie. The second week of January, I'd worked a 12-hour shift and lost a patient I cared about, and came home to a voicemail of my mother crying in the way that's louder than crying. I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook open, pen uncapped, and my brain ran the exact old code it had been trained on since I was 23. Dad's heart won't survive an eviction. It's only money. You have it. The case for surrender always arrives dressed as a case for love. And it always carries your father's pulse along with it. The check was half-dated when I heard bare feet behind me. Wren, up for water, hair like a bird's nest, taking in the whole scene. My 9-year-old, who mostly asks for snacks, tilted her head and asked one question on her way past. "Are you buying Grandma back?" Then she patted off with her water like she hadn't just cracked my chest open on the table. I sat there a long time. I didn't finish the check that night, but I didn't tear it up either. I left it undecided, which felt like weakness and turned out to be the smartest thing I did all winter. That weekend I drove to Cedar Hollow, not to the house, to the church attic, where that town keeps its history. I had a legitimate errand, 2 boxes of donated blankets from hospice families. An elderly woman named Ruth met me in the attic. While we stacked blankets, she sorted photo albums, and one photograph stopped me cold. A young woman at the front of a fellowship hall, facing folding chairs, holding a sheet of paper, shoulders braced like she was carrying a piano. My shoulders, my mother, 29 years old. "Oh that," Ruth said. 92, the year Walter got laid off. Back then, if a family wanted help from the benevolence fund, the treasurer made them stand up and read their circumstances out loud for transparency. And the treasurer that year, she paused and I already knew, was your grandmother. Made her own daughter read exactly what they owed and why in front of 40 women. Diane did it too. Chin up, got her help, walked out. I've known your mother 60 years, and I've never once heard her ask for anything again. I stood there holding a photograph of the exact moment my mother was built. The rules that crushed her she memorized, then taught to the next generation. Understanding a machine isn't the same as forgiving it. As I left, Ruth added quietly, "Your sister was here Tuesday, crying in the parking lot. The shop's gone, honey, everything's gone." 4 days later, my sister stood in my apartment for the first time in her life. She walked in wearing full makeup, carrying a handbag from her own store, the last display piece she couldn't sell. She started at sarcasm and fell the rest of the way down in one breath. None of this had to happen if you hadn't pulled your little confetti stunt, and her V. Ois broke off mid-sentence, the way a shelf finally gives out. "Naomi, the shop's closed. Marcus found the loan papers. Mom's losing the house. I have nothing, fix it." There it was, the family liturgy, fix it. I looked at my sister genuinely, maybe for the first time since we were kids. She wasn't a monster. She was a woman promoted at birth and never told the position was funded. "Fixing is my day job, Paige," I said. "I do it for strangers, for a paycheck with gloves on. This family kept asking me to do it for free, bare-handed, forever." She stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. Then she left, quietly, without slamming the door like a guest. That's how I knew it was truly over. 2 days later, my mother came and she brought paperwork. She sat at my table the way royalty sits in exile, spine straight, coat on, a small brooch pinned to her lapel like a medal from a war only she remembered. Inside the folder was a quitclaim deed. Her proposal arrived in the voice she uses for church budgets. I pay off the arrears 22-4, and your name goes on the deed, co-owner with rights of survivorship. She added, like a gift receipt, you'd be an owner, Naomi. Family in writing. Isn't that what you always wanted? My mother had diagnosed me perfectly, better than any therapist. She knew exactly what I'd spent 12 years trying to buy. And now, in genuine desperation, she was finally offering it, belonging, notarized. The horrifying part wasn't the offer. It was that it was accurate. Her eyes drifted to the jar on my shelf, and one eyebrow rose a millimeter. Morbid, she said. Bookkeeping, I answered. I told her I'd think about it, and I meant it. I needed to see what was being sold before I refused to buy it. After she left, I noticed something at the bottom of the last page. She had already signed her half. My mother, who does not beg, had pre-signed the deed. That's how frightened she was, and how confident she was in me. Be honest with me for a second. $22,400. Your childhood home on the auction block. Your name beside the woman who threw you into the snow. Would you sign? Type yes or no in the comments. Then stay, because what I chose cost more than the house. Here's what I actually did. Homework. A friend from my nursing years is married to a loan officer, and her husband walked me through the mechanics. Verdict: arrears plus fees, call it $23,000 to stop the sale. I had $7,000 left after Christmas. My credit union offers nurses a signature loan, and with overtime I could bridge the gap, meaning I could actually do it. Saving that house was a real, open door, and all it asked in return was 3 more years of weekend shifts and the rest of my life on retainer. My friend watched me run the math and said the smartest sentence anyone said to me all winter. So you can. The real question is what you'd actually be buying. That night I sat with 2 images in my head: the satellite view of my parents' roof, the maple over their driveway, the porch where my torn paper had fallen. And down the hall, my daughter's door, covered in paper birds, in an apartment I could afford, in a town where nobody moves my chair toward the kitchen. 2 roofs. I could only keep one safe. Before deciding anything, I owed one person a visit. Alma was dying faster that week, the way January takes people. She brought it up herself, unprompted, the way the dying so often know what you need before you do. You've got a decision face on, she said, so I gave her the shape of it, no names. She listened, eyes closed, and I thought she'd drifted off until she started talking up at the ceiling. When my husband died, my son asked me to sell the old house and move closer to the grandkids. I told him I would never sell his father's porch. Like the porch was him. It isn't, it's just lumber. She turned to me, her eyes the clearest I'd ever seen them. I kept the house, I lost the boy, 11 Christmases, just cards in the mail. She caught my wrist, gripping it with surprising strength. One more thing, honey. When you tear something up, keep the pieces, so you remember it was yours to tear. I drove home with her sentence, sitting in my chest like a swallowed coin. That Sunday, my father called. Your mother's at second service. Come see the house once, kid, while it's still ours. I left Ren with my neighbor and drove out alone. The house smelled the way it always has, lemon polish over old wood. I walked it slowly, like a last round on a quiet ward. In the kitchen doorframe, under 40 years of touched-up paint, you can still find the birthday pencil marks. My sister's, dark and confident. Mine, faint and thin, because it was always the stub of a pencil left over by my turn. Even the wall kept a ledger. Upstairs, my old bedroom didn't exist anymore. It had become a stockroom, boxes stamped willow and vines stacked to the ceiling, the unsold invent. Rye of my sister's dream, stored floor to rafter in the exact square footage where I used to sleep. My childhood room, holding up her debt. My father was on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee, and he handed me a small box of screws, already sorted and labeled. Whatever you decide, kid, he said, staring at the yard. The house was never the thing I minded losing. He didn't finish that thought. He didn't need to. Monday morning, I called my mother and kept it short. Mom, it's Naomi, I'm not signing and I'm not paying. Silence. 6 seconds of it counted the way you'd count a pulse. When she finally spoke, she didn't yell. Yelling is visible. Her voice went flat and formal, a treasurer closing a ledger. Then you are no daughter of mine. You are the one thing I could still call mine that worked. I filed that away where it belonged, but not before I let myself hear it fully. Mine that worked. An appliance review. I know, Mom, I said. That's why I'm hanging up. And I did, gently, no slam. Then I watched the old life finish collapsing, which took about 72 hours. One aunt texted that I'd stand at that auction with blood on my hands. At the grocery store, the pastor's wife looked directly through me at a display of oranges. The town's verdict was in, notarized faster than any deed. Naomi let her parents lose their home. I corrected no one. Their story about me was never mine to edit, only mine to stop funding. The auction sat locked for February 13th, 10 in the morning. On February 12th at 9:40 at night, somebody knocked softly twice. Through the peephole stood my mother, alone in the hallway light and wrong in ways it took a second to catalog. No brooch. Hair flat and damp from the sleet. No folder, no envelope, no props of any kind, and my mother does not travel without props. "May I come in?" she said. "I want you to understand what that sentence cost in her currency. My mother has entered every room of my life like a health inspector, and here she was, asking permission on my doormat. Wren was asleep down the hall. I let her in, and we sat at my table under too bright light, the button jar between us like a silent third party. She looked at it a long time, torn blue paper tangled with 40 years of spare buttons. The radiator ticked. Neither of us spoke. Then my mother reached into her coat and I braced for the deed. But what she laid on my table, face down, with the care you'd use handling a sleeping child, was a photograph. The fellowship hall, the folding chairs, the young woman with the sheet of paper and my shoulders. My mother, at 29, she'd taken it from the church album. Ruth must have mentioned I'd already seen it. My mother pressed it flat with 2 fingers, and when she spoke, her voice carried none of its usual furniture. "You saw this, so you know I don't beg." A breath. "I'm begging now." And then my mother told me the truth, the only time I ever heard her tell it without a witness to perform for. She wasn't afraid of losing the house. Houses are just lumber, she'd said it herself. She was afraid of tomorrow, 10 in the morning, the county website Human Mouths. "If that house sells at auction, I become her again," she said, finger pressed against her own young face in the photo. "That girl, in front of everyone. 35 years I have kept us looking right, Naomi. It's the only work I ever learned how to do." I want to be honest about what happened inside me. This is the part where I'm supposed to be strong, and what I actually was her daughter. Every cell in my body that had ever paid a bill in exchange for love reached for the checkbook. And then my mother, so close to landing the whole thing, said one word too many. "Help me stop the sale," she said, "and everything can go back to normal." Normal? The word dropped through the kitchen like a glass hitting the floor. I knew that country by heart. Normal was the folding chairs. Normal was checks passed in the dark. Normal was my daughter learning, one Christmas at a time, exactly what her mother's love was priced at. My hand stopped moving, and the strangest calm settled over me, the calm I get during a code, when the monitors are screaming and my job is simply to be the slowest heartbeat in the room. I stood up, took the jar down off the shelf and set it beside her photograph. Torn blue paper and spare buttons, right next to the fellowship hall. 2 exhibits, 2 women. The same machine, 35 years apart. "You didn't mind then," I said. "Don't mind now." She flinched like I'd touched an old burn because she understood she's the only person alive who could. Then I said the rest quietly once, the way you deliver a diagnosis. "You were right, Mom. A seat at this table is earned. I just finally stopped paying rent on mine." Her mouth opened. I wasn't finished. "The house isn't your shame. What you did to the daughter who kept paying to be loved, that's the only thing worth begging out." The radiator ticked. Then I did the thing I'd decided weeks earlier, folded and waiting in a drawer. I laid a piece of paper on the table, not a check, a signed lease. A 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the church, ground floor, easy on my father's knees. Deposit and 6 months paid in full in the names of Walter and Diane. $5,400 out of the $7,000 I had left. Beside it, a printed schedule of my father's heart medications, in my own handwriting. "This is a gift," I said, "not a purchase. There's a difference, and I'm 35 and only just learned it. I'm done buying what should have been free." She looked at the lease a long time. Then she stood, buttoned her coat, and picked it up with both hands, careful like it might tear. "No thank you, no apology." At the door, back to me, hand on the knob. "The auction is at 10, she said. "I know, Mom." A pause. I could have parked a car inside. "Wren's birds, she makes those herself." The door clicked shut, small and final, and I swear to you, almost gentle. At 10:04 the next morning, the house I grew up in sold at the sheriff's sale to a dairy farmer for $152,000. After the bank and the fees took their cut, my parents walked away with roughly $88,000. Not ruin, whatever the group chat wants to claim. Enough to live on carefully, just not enough to keep looking the way my mother had spent her whole life looking. I wasn't there. I was at work, holding Alma's hand because Alma had decided it was her day too. She died at noon, easy mid-morning light through the window. It was the worst day of my life, and it was also, I'm done apologizing for saying this, the first one that was fully, entirely mine. The town processed the sale exactly how I knew it would. My sister posted a long paragraph online about parents who lose their home over a grudge. It collected 200 comments, a casserole of outrage from people who never asked what actually happened. I didn't reply. I never posted my spreadsheet. I never told a single soul in that town about the apartment on the other side of Cedar Hollow, and I'm not telling them now either. You're hearing it. They never will. Their story needed a villain, and I had finally learned to stop applying for better roles inside it. My sister's husband filed for divorce that spring. She moved into the second bedroom of an apartment she doesn't know I quietly paid for. My father calls every Sunday, talking screws and heart rates. My mother doesn't call. Spring came anyway. It always does. The jar stayed on my shelf, and Wren never asked about it until the day she finally did. A Saturday morning in April, and she dragged the step stool over and brought the jar down with both hands, serious as an archivist. Is this the money you ripped up at Grandma's? No preamble. It is, I said. Why'd you keep it? And I heard Alma's voice in my chest. Keep the pieces so you remember it was yours to tear. I gave my daughter the child-sized translation, the truest version I know. So I remember the money was mine, and so were the hands. Wren considered that with syrup on her chin, then delivered the kind of proposal you only get from a 9-year-old engineer. We should make it into something. It's just sad, sitting in a jar. So we spent the morning on the kitchen floor with tape and glue. The torn pieces refused to become checks again. They'd stopped being checks the moment they left my hands on that porch. Wren folded them her own way, crease by crease, and what came off the floor an hour later was one paper bird, blue and white, a little crooked, $31,000 worth of a bird. We hung it in the window beside the Christmas ones, where it caught the afternoon light. Grandma would like this one, she said. Kids aim without knowing they're aiming. Maybe one day she'll see it, I said, and left the window unlocked on that possibility. 8 months later, it was Christmas again. My own table sat 4 people comfortably, no folding chair end. A small roast chicken because ham carries too many associations now. Paper birds filled the whole window, the $31,000 bird right in the center, where Wren insisted it belonged. At 5 o'clock, someone knocked, and through the peephole stood my father in his good coat, holding a plate of cookies with visibly burnt edges, and I want that detail preserved forever. He'd baked alone. He mentioned twice that my mother hadn't helped, and I didn't ask why. He stayed an hour, admiring every bird like a blueprint. Before he left, he pulled a marker from his coat pocket, planned the whole thing like the machinist he still is, and measured Wren against my kitchen doorframe, drawing her line dark and pressed twice over her name and the date. The first mark on that frame's fresh paint. Nobody handed him the stub pencil this time. Different frame, different ledger. From my window, I watched his truck idling in the lot, and in the passenger seat, a shape I recognized by posture alone. My mother, she didn't come up, I didn't go down. But Wren saw her and waved big and unedited, the way kids wave at passing trains. My mother, one beat late, raised her hand, held it up for a moment, then looked away. Not a perfect ending. Just a hand raised. The difference is that my daughter isn't learning those old rules. The curriculum ends with me. So here's the final accounting, since this whole story was always about ledgers. My parents are settled now, 3 blocks from the church. My father walks to the hardware store most mornings, and I'm told there are real flowers in the window boxes this year, actual living geraniums, and I've decided that's enough for me. My sister works retail and pays her divorce lawyer in installments. That handbag finally sold. My own house fund is growing again, past $4,000, headed toward a yard and a dog. The jar on my shelf is empty these days, just buttons. The bird still hangs in the window. Free things, it turns out, are the only ones that ever appreciate in value. If your seat at the table has a price tag on it, you were never actually family at that table. You were revenue. And the day you stop paying isn't the day you lose them. It's the day you finally find out who was ever really there to begin with. That's my story. 2 torn checks, 1 glass jar, and a paper bird that cost $31,000 and was worth every single cent. If someone in your life has made you pay for a seat that should have been free, set the price back down to 0 today. Share this with someone who's still paying. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you at the next table.